we have a commitment to get the basic rate down to 20p. It took us more than one parliament to get the last 5p reduction in income tax. It wouldn't necessarily be done in one parliament, but we have that commitment and we do want to reduce the burden of income tax, unlike the Labour Party.
So Neil Kinnock has nailed his public spending colours to the flagpost, but will John Major's cabinet hoist the banner of tax cuts with the same urgent enthusiasm that Margaret Thatcher used to do? Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Mellor, have you still got fire in your belly for tax cuts?
Oh, I think it's a key part of our strategy. But people talk about it as if it's either or, and of course it isn't. If you look at what we've achieved these last 12 years, there's been a tremendous increase in public expenditure on key areas like the health service, expenditure up from 8 billion to 32 billion pounds, public expenditure up 20%, even allowing for the fall in the value of money through inflation, whilst at the same time we've reduced the standard rate of income tax from 33 pence to 25 pence. So I don't think it's either or. I think that's to simplify the issue.
Right. Well, I want to pursue that with you a lot more closely, but just before we do, John Major talks about cutting the standard rate as a primary objective. A primary objective that might only be achieved in not the next Parliament, but the Parliament after that. Sounds rather less primary than secondary.
It is a priority, and I think that, but, you know, it has to take its place alongside other things that we are also committed to doing. I mean, the thing about the economy is that you can't say in the budget after next I'll do so-and-so, and in the budget after that I'll do that. And I can't improve on the formulation that Norman Lamont gave, that you showed just before this interview, that we will make progress on it as and when we can, but there is, whether it will be within the next Parliament or whether some part of it can be done within the next Parliament is a matter that must depend on the issues that we have to face. But what is absolutely clear, and the record shows, and since we're on the record, I suppose I might as well talk about the record shows, better than any promises that we can make, that we are committed to public expenditure. And if what people are worried about is that tax cuts will be at the expense of necessary public provision, plainly that won't happen, because it hasn't happened.
Now, if you were as enthusiastic about tax cuts as you could possibly be, it would, of course, be possible to increase indirect taxation again in order to finance direct tax cuts. Is that a possibility?
Chancellor's always got a great range of options. I wouldn't say that would be a basis any more than any other change. I think what we're looking for is to reduce the rate of tax as it bears on families, to carry on what we're doing.
Well, let me put it the other way round. In reality, given the economic circumstances you face, the reason why Norman Lamont is talking about it being not this year, next year, but maybe 6, 7, 8 years away before you've achieved the objective of getting down to 20 pence in the pound, because in the next few years you could only actually achieve it by raising indirect taxes like VAT.
No, I don't think that's necessarily so, but I think what
Not necessarily so.
No, I don't think it's so, but I think what Norman is doing is actually making clear that although politicians, particularly politicians in opposition, talk as if, you know, all you have to do is have the will, and then lots of money comes up from the Whitehall money mine and you distribute it as you see fit, it isn't like that at all. Now, we have substantial public expenditure commitments to which we have already firmly pledged ourselves, some £40 billion worth of extra public expenditure over the next 3 years. And the key issue between us and the Labour Party is whether that is sufficient or whether they could properly fund a further 20 billion, or I think we'll be saying in due course, even more. And we say they could only do that by raising taxes. And that's really the issue, rather than the question of whether we can sustain public expenditure whilst also having ambitions to cut tax. Because after all, we've achieved the two in the past, as I've said.
We go into all these commitments and people can get very confused by the numbers, not least cabinet members and shadow cabinet members. But one statement which has always struck me as being not totally unwise is Norman Lamont says that one shouldn't take notice, or much notice, of little red book projections because they're often so wrong. So therefore your promises on the basis of what you say we're going to spend have as much value as the promises anyone else may get.
Actually, I'm very surprised Norman did actually say that, because I think that we nail our colours quite firmly to the commitments that we enter into. And
well, he's always very suspicious about those projections. He's been on in this chair here saying, oh, don't take too much notice of those projections, Mr. Dimbleby.
Well, I mean, plainly, we have to give an estimate. We have to make an assumption about what growth will be in 3 years' time. And we believe there's no reason why it shouldn't be at the level that it's put. But you can't absolutely say, nor can anybody else, that's what it's going to be. But what is absolutely clear is that we have an affordable basis for our public expenditure, which will allow, for instance, just for the next 2 years, the £26.5 billion of extra expenditure we've committed ourselves to, £10 billion on social security. We're already signed up to that.
You don't have much choice in that, do you?
Well, other governments, of course, have actually made reductions or have failed to honour pledges. One of the great things is we managed to get through the 80s without ever having to run away from public expenditure commitments. You will recall that in the 70s, when Mr. Healey had to be heaved off his aeroplane and the IMF insisted on cuts, government commitments to public expenditure, road building, hospitals, were slashed. We've never had to do that, and we've always been able to plan for growth. But we can do it if the economy is buoyant, if there's confidence in the government's handling of the economy, and if there's a proper relationship between what you spend and what you tax, with limited scope at certain stages in the cycle for borrowing.
OK, but let's look at this matter of principle. You want to, as it were, have it both ways. You want to be able to say, yes, we can deliver tax cuts at some stage, but yes, we will also give all that we need to public spending. Now, what that means is, at the moment where we now stand, that tax cuts have to take second place to public spending, in your judgment?
Well, there's no doubt about it that I am not going to make the Chancellor's next budget statement for him or the one after that, and you know, one has to operate under those constraints. I'm sure you and the viewers are aware of that fact.
The one after that's going to be the next one after that is going to be the next government, isn't it?
Well, indeed, but
we have
our hopes and expectations.
You can be a little bit brave,
to be part. No, it's not going to be brave. It's just a question of the fact that, you know, when you're in charge of the management of the economy, you just can't just, you know, strike out in the way that you can in opposition when nothing much turns on what you say. But what is quite clear is, look, the record shows that we have been able to reduce taxation and to increase public expenditure to heights that no one would have thought possible 10 years ago. Plainly, our commitment to public expenditure is a commitment to fund efficient and effective public services, some part of which, of course, comes not just by putting money in, but by ensuring that there are better standards of service. But it also comes about, let me make one thing absolutely clear, this is not some Dutch auction that we're getting involved in with the Labour Party. Though we are committed to increases in public expenditure is to be kept under rigorous control with targeting and priorities firmly established. And that is, frankly, been one of the key bases for this government's success, our ability to reduce public spending as a share of national output, while, of course, increasing the wealth of the country, and therefore being able to fund some programmes more than some of our detractors would have thought we would have done.
But you would agree that at this moment, and there's a great deal of public concern about public services, as you know, which include concerns about public spending, you would agree that it is not possible at one and the same time to say this pound is going into tax cuts, and it's also going into public services. What the electorate wants to know is, at the moment, do you prioritise, to use your own term, do you prioritise public spending over tax cuts?
No, I don't think I'm not going to deal with the matter on that basis, because I think it's a false choice, as I've already said. The answer is...
Well, it's not a false choice, is it, for respect? If you take at any one point, I don't want to interrupt the flow of your argument at all, but if you at any one point are saying, what do we do with this money that we have now, as a matter of pure basic common sense, it is obvious that you can't put it both into, for instance, improving teachers' pay and into tax cuts. That money has to go one way or the other.
Indeed it does, and of course those judgments have to be made at the time. You know, and please believe this is not an evasion, because it has happened in that way. We have managed to increase, for instance, you mentioned teachers' pay. We've managed to increase the pay for public servants like teachers, doctors, nurses, and so on, well beyond the rate of inflation, something that wasn't always achieved. People like doctors saw cuts in their real value of their pay in the 70s. We've been able to do that whilst reducing the rates of taxation. And so there is no trade-off between the two. You have to strike a balance.
You say you strike a balance, but it would be right to say that since April 88, you have in reality, while proclaiming the virtues of future income tax cuts, have in fact prioritised public spending.
Well, what we haven't done is reduce the standard rate since then.
Yeah, which was then your goal. It was your goal. But
the thing about it is that over a period of time, it's possible to turn one's attention to a range of things that government have to do. And I think, if I may say so, so far as we're concerned, the record shows that we have been able to strike a balance, and despite the ups and downs